start the recording. I let people coming in and you can start.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the ELTA Live Webinar Series. If you are a returning visitor, then welcome back. If you're a first-time attendee of these webinars, then hopefully you'll become a long-term attendee or perhaps even an ELTA member. In this webinar, we will focus on legal data analytics, and our aim with this topic is to empower lawyers and give them practical tools to measure the value of legal work beyond the traditional billable hour. So we look at legal data analytics as a toolkit that makes it easier for lawyers to access numbers, visualize the data related to legal work, and actually make sense of it. We will talk about all this in detail, but first, introductions. And also a quick reminder that we are recording this webinar and we'll share it later among participants and also on ELTA's YouTube channel. So I'm your host this morning. My name is Orsolya Szabó, and while I'm an ELTA ambassador specifically for Hungary, I actually keep an eye on legal tech developments across Central Eastern Europe. Following an international legal career of more than a decade in M&A transactions across Central Eastern Europe, back in 2017, I founded a legal tech consulting firm called InvestCE that has become a trusted advisor to corporate clients and law firms in Central Eastern Europe on optimizing legal work processes, including better access to data. So when identifying meaningful partnerships for my legal tech consulting business, I was really lucky to get to know Jody Baker, the founder and CEO of Zakia Technologies, and also the president of the Australian Legal Technology Association, ALTA. And Zakia is a legal data analytics platform, also increasingly used by our clients in Central Eastern Europe. It is a great pleasure to have you, Jody, and our joint Hungarian client, Adam Szijjártó, Legal Director of Aegis Pharmaceuticals, join in for this webinar. Warm welcome to both of you.
Thank you very much.
So Jody, given you have such an interesting background of transitioning from lawyer and business analyst roles to data-driven technology, I thought it would be great if you first shared your story, your career path with the ELTA community before handing over to Adam for introductions.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Orsi, and thank you everybody for having me today. My accent is quite different to yours, so if anybody doesn't understand what I'm talking about, please ask me to slow down and repeat anything that you don't understand. My story began as presumably many of yours. I was a lawyer straight out of university, and I practiced as a mergers and acquisitions and transactional lawyer before going on to become an in-house lawyer at one of Australia's largest stockbroking and investment houses here in Australia. And then I went across to the business side, and as Orsi has alluded to, I became a business analyst, and I stayed in that career for more than a decade before returning to legal practice, not as a lawyer, but as the founder of an organisation called Hive Legal, which was Australia's first virtual law firm. And it was really a result of seeing so much change in the industry, driven primarily by clients and technology and really a changing structural environment within which legal practice could be managed. And from there, I really developed quite an appetite for legal technologies and started to see an opportunity to really create something that started not just with the analytics, but actually more with the visibility tools. So the ability for in-house legal teams to be able to bring information together in a central location. And from there, the data-driven discussion was born. So Zakia is really the product of my legal background and my business analyst background brought together to allow lawyers to collect their information in one place, but then visualize that data in a way that helps them to communicate with their businesses about what they're doing, who they're doing it for, and some of the other important metrics we're going to talk about today. So I'm very passionate about legal data analytics, and I'm excited to talk to you all about it today. And I'm going to hand over to Adam, who I've been working with for just on 12 months now, and I'm very excited to hear his story and feedback as well.
Yes, thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. As I said, my name is Adam Szijjártó. I'm head of Aegis Pharmaceuticals PLC's legal function. I have been in this position for more than 10 years now. previously I held different in-house positions in other companies, but that was so long time ago, I hardly remember those times. Obviously, legal analytics was not part of the game when I started my career, but I understand that this is more and more important. And yes, as Jody mentioned, what brought me here is our cooperation with Zakia in the field of legal analytics. We have what can be interesting. We have 10 lawyers located in Hungary, and the company is present actually in 18 countries. We have 3 other lawyers in different countries.
Thank you. Glad to have you both join in for this webinar. Shall we go through the agenda items for today? Yeah. We have a few blocks to cover. We'll discuss the case for legal data analytics. Then we'll move on to discuss what we want to measure, so the mechanics of data analytics, cover in detail the actual data that we should be collecting and analyzing in a legal context, and finally the output of how we can create visual reports based on legal data. And we'll leave 5-10 minutes in the end to answer questions from the audience. So let's get started. Kicking off with the basics, Jody, what is legal data analytics good for? What should lawyers aim to achieve with it?
Yes, okay. So before I kick off, Orshi, I might just, I guess, put some context around the discussion today. So for those who are not familiar with Zakia, it is an in-house tool, an in-house software that is used for capturing information about who is working on what and for whom. And in the process, you collect data, and then that formulates into dashboards and reports. However, we're not here to talk about Zakia. We're not here to sell that product to you. We will use some examples from Zakia because it's what we're familiar with. The 3 of us both all work in that tool and have familiarity with it. But I will say that everything that we're talking about is available in all sorts of different ways. And at its most basic level, Excel is the place that you might use some of these tactics. And there are other platforms, of course, none of them as good as Zakia, but there are other platforms that do very similar sorts of things. So this is a general conversation about legal data analytics, but we will be using examples so that we are familiar with that, and we'll be turning that into a language that is more generic for you. So in terms of the case for legal data analytics, as I mentioned, my background is in both legal and in business analytics. For me, there is a natural disconnect between the words that lawyers live and breathe and work in every single day and the data and charts and numbers that the business often communicate in. And some of what legal data analytics is all about is building a bridge between the way that lawyers communicate in words and the way the rest of the business or the clients might be communicating about what is being done. And so building that bridge is a way of communicating. That's all it is, really. And sometimes that communication is for a specific purpose, like resourcing or managing a budget or what have you. But at the end of the day, it is all about the communication. So that can be, I guess, brought into a more specific set of examples by looking at things like prioritising work, allocating resources and managing capacity. We all know that lawyers work far too hard and often have far too much on their list. But sometimes it's important to take work away from those who have too much and give it to people who have a little bit more capacity, or even allowing for capacity to sit in a team so that when new projects or unexpected things come up, there is capacity there to manage that. So having data available to see where the workload is and where the resources are available is an important part of managing a large team. Identifying work that is perhaps of less importance or indeed ripe for automation or elimination, or managing it in a slightly different way, like managed legal services. And we do know that there is such a huge shift at the moment in the legal industry. There is so much in the way of technology that finding things for automation is a great opportunity to deal with that trend towards more work. But sometimes you don't know which work is perfect for that automation. So data can really help us to identify that work. And then, of course, managing budget and allocating costs is a really critical part of every team, and that probably goes without saying. And then for in-house teams, there's of course the added issue of managing your external firms, the spend, which firms are receiving which sort of work, and whether that's an appropriate allocation. They're just a small sample of opportunities that you can identify for using legal data analytics, turning it into some sort of beautiful pictures and what have you, and then being able to communicate that for decision-making purposes. However, one of the most critical parts of legal data analytics is really around demonstrating value. And that might be demonstrating the value of an in-house legal team. And I'm going to ask Adam to make a comment on this in a moment. So it might be about talking about how the in-house legal team is servicing its internal client base. But for law firms, it's the same thing. How do I, as a law firm, communicate to my clients that I'm delivering them value? Now, I've got some examples up here of some research from the GC350 benchmarking study that looked at whether legal departments are valued within their own organisation, and we found in that report that 44% of legal departments don't have a high profile, and that 77% don't measure the value that they deliver. Of course, value can be measured in a really wide range of different ways, and I've listed some of them here, such as the volume of the work being done, the spend, the strategic importance, the risk profile, etc. And it might be different for every organisation, and certainly different for a law firm, but capturing data in a way that allows you to communicate that is, of course, a critical part of it. Adam, I'm interested in your thoughts around how important you think it is to be able to demonstrate the value of your team to the rest of the organisation.
Yes, I totally agree that it's very important, and I also agree that it's very hard to demonstrate value without registering what you actually do. So starting to have a register of the matters you work on, especially if you put stickers on those matters in terms of volume and expenditure and complexity, strategic importance, whatever, then you become able to show what you are actually doing. Otherwise, it's just feelings. So you can go to the management and ask for more resources, either in terms of budget or either in terms of headcount. And the only thing you can say is that, oh, we have a lot of things to do. And management may ask, what is that lot of things? And then you have a problem. So I think as far as demonstrating value, it's inevitable to have a register of your methods. Now the thing is that in a law firm you are obviously forced to do it, because if you bill on or if you charge a bill on the hour, then you need to register what your people do. But because you need to obviously show to your clients what you have done and for what you ask your fee. But in case of a legal department, there isn't such daily or at least monthly pressure. So I think it's a bigger step in terms of mindset change, that we need to register what we are doing in order to be able to show it to others, and in order to go to, let's say, reality from feelings.
It's when you talk about asking for more resources, Adam, it reminds me of a story that one of our clients here in Australia told me before they adopted Zakia, where they went to their CFO and they asked for 2 more headcount, so 2 more full-time employees. And the CFO said, yes, I can see that you're very busy. Can you give me some data point so that I can put that into the business case for approval? And they had nothing. They had not a single data point that they could use to say, this is why we need more work. And the CFO's response was very clear. Yes, I will approve it because there is a lot of work on and you're working very hard. But for the next recruit, you must have a data point. And that was when they came and adopted Zakia. So it's an interesting point you make.
Yes, this is true. What you say as an example, it's for the expansion of the team, but it also works on the level of the individual team members. A team member feels he has a lot of things to do, totally overwhelmed, totally stressed, then goes to the manager and says, look, I have too much to do. We should do something because I need to prioritize. And then what's the request from the manager? Give me a list of your matters. And obviously, the lawyer, already overwhelmed, becomes even more frustrated. I wanted help, not another job to do. Make lists. So it's better to register the data, starting to register the data before we get overwhelmed and before we are already too stressed to deal with that.
It reminds me of the a picture tells 1,000 words, which I think is evident once you've got the data in hand. And one of the things that we are very passionate about is that if you capture the data, however you capture that data, it's easy to then pull that data into a format that is able to communicate exactly what you're looking for. We need another resource, or we've managed our budget well, or we've worked on X number of deals to the value of several billions of dollars this year. Those sorts of things become much more easily communicated.
That is very insightful, Jody and Adam. Thank you so much. So what are the metrics that lawyers should be measuring beyond times, and what shall we consider as legal data?
The data is, for the purposes of this discussion today, we've broken it down into the who, what, when and why. So we'll walk through each of those one by one, Orshi, and we'll take a little bit of time to do that. Before we do that, we might just step through the mechanics of, or some of the things that you should be thinking about. If you're going on a legal data analytics journey and you're really just starting, there are some things that you need to think about. And we'll come back to the data itself, but you do need to give some thought, some very careful thought to what it is that you want to measure and also why you want to measure it. So thinking about the end communication point, whether that be to argue for more resources, or whether it be to demonstrate the value of the team, or to demonstrate to your clients that you're offering real value, it's important to articulate that, I think, right at the beginning, because it does influence what you measure. But there are some just very simple mechanics that need some consideration. So where will you store your data? Is it Excel? Is it a platform? Where is that platform hosted? We all know that information security is a paramount concern in the era of SaaS software and GDPR and various other considerations. So that's a really important question. And it might be that it is something that you can store yourselves, and you've got the systems internally, but you need to think through that and the mechanics of who's going to manage that process. Having a project manager or a champion, whether it's one of the paralegals in your team or a very young member of the team who's very enthusiastic about entering data, or everybody taking responsibility for something, there really needs to be one person who really champions it. And we have seen many occasions where it's not, there's not a single person who's made responsible for this project, and things don't seem to really push forward in a meaningful way. It's really important that you have one person who understands the purpose of why you're doing this and can really motivate the rest of the team to do it, and do it in the way that you've agreed to move forward. And then, of course, you have to actually collect the data. And the trick here is to make sure it is as simple as possible. Make it a really, really easy process. Adam, I think you made a comment last night about it cannot be fast enough for it to be successful. Did you want to share that with the group?
Yes, I mean, especially in an in-house legal team, as a team where, as I said, there's no billing at the end of the month, so the salary of the people is not dependent on the fees we can charge. So there's no immediate pressure on registering the matters and the data, collecting the data related to the matters. There will be a natural resistance against another bureaucratic tool to use. So what we understood is that however quick your platform system is in registering the data, registering one specific matter, people will say it's not quick enough. because the expectation, I guess, would be that I just do my work and somehow whatever I'm doing is registered somewhere. But at least at this point, we are not yet there. And maybe concerning GDPR and any other issues, we don't want to be there. So at this moment, we need our people to cooperate in registering the data related to their work, and that takes some time. So I think we collectively need to understand that this time spent on registering our matters will actually help us later when we try to analyze what we are doing, understand what we are doing, and then we try to explain to others what we are doing.
Yes, and so keeping that collection point, obviously the collection needs to happen and it needs to be consistent, and we'll come back and talk about clean data and consistency a little bit later, but that's the most important part of the whole process, is the actual collection of the data, and making that as smooth, as seamless, and as embedded in the workflow of what you do is a very big part of setting this up. And then, of course, the most exciting part, or the really enjoyable part, is pulling it all together and putting it into reports and using it for communication. But again, thinking about that ahead of time and thinking about what you want to communicate is an important part of the mechanics. Might just
Shall we dive into the data then?
Indeed, we will. And so let's have a look at each of these: who, what, when, and why. The way that we've framed this presentation for you today is to think about the inputs, what sort of data you might capture, and then think about the outputs, what you might use it for, so that if you're starting on this journey, you've got the opportunity to take exactly what we've got here and think about how you might use it for your own legal data analytics project. And so when we talk about the who, for us, there are two parts to the who. Who is your client? Who are you doing the work for? And who is doing the work? And it's really just two questions, just two data points. So for an in-house legal team, that might be your business unit or department within your organisation. And the who is doing the work might be one person or a collection of people who are doing that. In much larger organisations, you might go one step further and put that into separate groups within your legal team. So it might be a contracts team or a litigation team and so on. But essentially it's two data points, and you can keep it as simple as that. And then, of course, the outputs can be quite rich. So you can look at things like, well, how many of these matters are we doing for this particular client, or which of our clients are the most demanding in the business? And then, of course, resourcing might be something like, how many of our matters are being done by our internal team versus our external team? And what does that look like when we think about our capacity versus what sort of skills we have available, or the resources that we have available to us? And then, of course, there's effectiveness, which is a different measure altogether. But I might, rather than spending too much time on this slide, I'm actually going to hand over to Adam, who I think has some good examples about how he's used some of this data, or what he's noticed in his data when he's been collecting it.
Yes, there are various things in connection with the who. I mean, the internal clients. What was somewhat frustrating earlier is that noisy clients tend to look more important than less noisy clients. So an ambitious person from a given department can just pull the legal team up and down with frequent phone calls, and maybe on the other hand, there is a much more important project within the organization led by a less pushy or aggressive person, and we will just really lose focus and prioritize on something we should not. So I think understanding that where the strategically important complex matters are within the organization is very, very important, because we need to focus on those areas, regardless of the noise made by anywhere else. And the other thing is there is this weighted by size or value chart. well, maybe that belongs to the what, but I find very interesting those areas where there are too many small matters. We define extra small matters as matters that can be performed within an hour, and I have doubts whether those matters are actually legal work. So we think that with departments that send us too many matters in this category, we should have a talk. We should discuss whether the distribution of the tasks between the departments is the best or not.
Adam, it's so there is a combination, of course, between who and what, and bringing all of these data points together is part of the joy of this. But what you have discussed there in terms of the sometimes not legal administrative type tasks, or even arming the business with tools, automation tools for generating their own documents, identifying those by collection of data and saying, oh, we can see that we've done 300 NDAs or confidentiality agreements in the past 12 months. Perhaps a project that allows the business to generate their own confidentiality agreement is the right way to resource that particular type of work. And so that's precisely the sort of outcome that is delightful from legal data analytics, is that it allows the team to do more without necessarily having to add more headcount. And I'm going to just take a slight segue and talk about one of our clients here in Australia, which is Coca-Cola Amatil. They talk about the fact that they see their workload increasing, and in 2 years' time or 3 years' time, if there's 20% more work, they want to be able to demonstrate that 20% more work has been done, but that their headcount hasn't increased. And so that's part of their legal data analytics journey, is to be able to capture that information in a way that demonstrates that they're bringing in new tools and solving some of these problems in unique ways, but they need to capture the data to be able to identify where they can do that effectively. Thank you for that, Adam. So we might move on to the what, and I think, Orshi, feel free to hurry me along if I'm being too verbose. I think we're mostly on time. So this is thinking about things like the categories of work as an input. So whether it's intellectual property or contract work or litigation work, for example. We also think that it's important to capture whether it's business as usual work or project work, because it does allow you to then separate out the work that was not anticipated in a year. You can resource for business as usual work. That's what the business is doing. And if the business anticipates growing by 10% a year, then there's likely to be 10% more work. But if a litigation that you weren't expecting comes along and you have to somehow fit that in, then that's significant, and it might not necessarily be repeated in the subsequent year, or a massive acquisition or something that's quite unexpected. And I think that if you want your data to be, pardon me, if you want your data to be useful in a way that allows you to predict the future or analyse for the future, then you need to be able to separate out those two things. And then, of course, one of the other what elements is how much or how many, and this goes to the data point that we were talking about earlier that Adam mentioned, is perhaps a what, and that is size, for example, or risk profile. So sometimes those things can also impact how you see the data. And the outputs from these things are quite predictable. I feel like I'm probably telling some of you things that you already know, but of course, being able to look at the what sort of work it is will help you to resource by work profile. So if you have a lot of intellectual property work, you probably need an intellectual property lawyer. And so that's a fairly obvious outcome. But sometimes if you see a trend in the data, like the intellectual property work is increasing, or it's larger than you thought, and you wondered why you were struggling with that particular type of work, perhaps it does inform the ability to outsource it to your law firm, because that's where the specialisation is. Or maybe it's appropriate for a body of work to be bundled up and given to a specific resource internally. And then, of course, that leads to process improvement, so that you can say, well, perhaps there's a part of the workflow here. We've understood what sort of work this is, and maybe we can actually say there's a bottleneck there that we can deal with. Adam, did you have anything that you wanted to add on this particular piece? I know that we talked, we've got the wrong one here. We did have a different chart up to show you, and I don't know why I've ended up with this particular version, so apologies for that. But Adam, we were looking at a chart earlier that had litigation growing by 20% year on year. So if everybody can imagine a different sort of chart here, that was what we were going to talk to.
Yes, I think it's, I was just smiling when you mentioned the division of the tasks as business as usual or project. Sometimes I feel that, yes, sometimes I feel that project type work and urgency and fighting the fire is like the business as usual. So that distinction is sometimes hard to be made, but I obviously agree that categorizing the matters based on the risk profile and the strategic importance and the volume of the work needed for them is really, really crucial.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
I think that actually the challenges are very similar for all of us lawyers out there, whether you're in-house or you're practicing as an attorney. We all know like what are the issues. I think really the point with legal data analytics is that looking at it as a toolkit, right, as a unified platform where you collect all that sort of data, all your, you know, like who you're doing the work for, what is the actual work that you're doing, when you're doing that work, and how you transform all of that into a visual chart or visual reporting. So yes, we know these challenges, but it's really good to go through them really and think about, you know, technology to support that sort of communication process with the business teams and clients. So perhaps
Absolutely.
shall we go to the when we are doing the work? And
yes. Indeed. And so when is quite different, I think, for in-house legal teams to law firms. And so the two data points that we've put here are turnaround time and time input. And turnaround time, and Adam, feel free to jump in here, that is the measure, I think, for most in-house legal teams. The clients of an in-house legal team often don't really care how much time it took you to do a task. They care how long it took you to get it back to them. And so that turnaround time measure is really a piece that is fundamental to most of our clients on the in-house side. But for law firms, of course, time recording is the long-held way of measuring value and, of course, time input. We do also use a proxy, which is size. So Adam has mentioned extra small being less than an hour, and we use T-shirt sizes, so extra small through to extra large, to tag a matter. And then we put a weighting on that based on how long we think an extra small matter or an extra large matter should take. So there's a proxy there, but I think that for a law firm, when you're capturing time, you have that measure. And then, of course, the outputs are really interesting. I think that this is where communication can be so powerful, where you can show the turnaround time for a particular business unit of the particular type of work and the turnaround time, and you bring all of those different metrics together, then you can really show that you have delivered back to the business exactly what they need. And we've got fabulous case studies of clients who have really enjoyed being able to communicate to their clients just how quickly they turn things around, a body of data rather than just a single matter. And that's probably one of the most powerful outputs, I think, of the data analytics. Of course, it does allow you to do other things like identifying bottlenecks if you see that there are things that are not moving quickly enough and not being turned around, but you can manage that with the data, and it gives you the visibility so that you can address those. Adam, did you have anything that you wanted to add, particularly in relation to the turnaround time metrics?
Yes, absolutely. I think you were totally right in saying that our internal clients really don't care for the time spent, but they do care for the turnaround time. And legal consultancy is like a consultancy business. So the turnaround time, I think, is dependent a lot on the number of matters we have. It's like inventory in other businesses. So we basically need to push down inventory levels. Inventory here meaning the number of matters we have. And in order to work on that, we obviously need to analyze it. Why it's bigger this month than in the previous month? What are the trends? how many small matters we have, which we could maybe just get rid of to increase or to decrease actually, the turnaround time for the more important matters. So yes, this is a very important aspect of it.
One of the things that I'm just going to add another metric in here, which is a little bit left of centre and not something that is strictly speaking an input that we usually talk about in this presentation, but we capture the status of a matter, and I'm sure that that's a concept that everybody can relate to, because of course sometimes you have a matter come in and it's open and you review the contract and you send it back to the business, but the matter is not closed, it's not finished, it's just with the business for a period of time. And so the status of that matter might be dormant or awaiting action whilst it's sitting with the business and you're waiting for them to come back to you, or it's sitting with the law firm for review or whatever that might be. One of the things that has been very interesting through our journey with our client base is to be able to articulate how long things sit with the legal department, as opposed to sitting with, say, the business or the law firm or the other side. And being able to visualize that, I don't have a graphic here for you today, I'm afraid, but being able to show that on a 6-week turnaround time, for 4.5 weeks of that, it sat with somebody else, but that the legal team was only responsible for that piece of work for 1.5 weeks of a 6-week turnaround time, is a very powerful metric for communicating or identifying where the bottlenecks might be, because it does unfortunately tend to be that the business always points the finger to the legal department and says, why didn't you do this faster? And if you were only faster, we could close these deals a little bit more quickly. And so being able to pull that data down and communicate that in a manner that is collaborative for moving things through the pipeline faster has been very powerful.
Yes, for that, I think you need to, or we all need to remind that we have somehow to get the cooperation of our team members, because in order to measure turnaround time accurately, they need to register changes in the status of the matter when the change happens, instead of allocating an hour or two on registering the matters within the week. I don't know, like for example, Wednesday morning I register everything in the platform. It doesn't really help, because that distorts the results of the turnaround time. So this is a big effort of convincing. We are working on that.
That is actually also a very interesting point of distortion of how does data that consistent, how do you clarify the data? Do you have experience with that? How you start off at using a platform and then how you clarify on the data embedded or input it into the platform?
Actually, somebody in the chat mentioned the importance of the paralegals. I just had a conversation yesterday to one of the legal directors of a major company in Hungary, and he mentioned that they have a similar platform to register their matters, but he also has someone who works on the results and the data coming out from the platform. Now, obviously, if you have 100 lawyer team, then you can allocate sufficient resources to go very, very deep into the data and to analyze every aspect of what you get. Unfortunately, we are not that big, but still, yes, we try to allocate time to the analysis.
I think it's a really important point is to appreciate that data has to be clean and it has to be consistent. And we, when we were preparing for today, we had a conversation about the journey that you go on where in the very first instance, you might just capture some very basic data points. It might just be, 4 or 5 data points so that you're really starting at a very high level. And it will be lumpy to begin with because some people will be very enthusiastic and some people will be much slower. And it will, over a period of time, it will find a level as you start to pull the data together. Or in Zakia, where it's automated into a dashboard and you don't have to do that work for you, you will see over a period of time that it will find a level. So there's an importance around the cleanliness of the data that has to, you have to pay attention to it. It's not necessarily going to stop you from getting some fabulous insights even from day one, per the conversation that Adam was having about being able to see who the noisy clients are. That's a really powerful data point right from the beginning, but there are other data points that might take a little bit more time or a little bit more work just to make sure that the data is clean and that it's consistent.
But I think that's also very comforting, right? Like really the basics here, this is an introductory webinar into legal data analytics. You get to start somewhere. And then once you start using a platform and have your people onboarded on it and start inputting data, then with time, as that evolves, your workflows will evolve and you'll eventually get to more consistent and more clean data. So the output will actually be much better with time as well.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Shall we talk about the, oops, I'm getting funny things on my computer. Shall we talk about, oh, sorry, one more thing on the when, just another chart here is thinking about your forward planning. So where you are capturing information, it starts to inform what your year looks like ahead. So if you're looking in January at everything that you know is already going to happen in the year ahead, and you have an understanding of what your team capacity is, then you can start to do some planning for that. And of course, if there's a great deal of seasonality to your business and you've been collecting data, as some of our clients have now for 2 or 3 years, you start to see that every June it is extremely busy, but it's very quiet in August. And so that allows you to start to manage your resources accordingly, whether that's people going on holiday or whether it's being able to outsource to law firms for a particular period of time. But that's certainly something that allows you to get that visibility across the year. Shall we talk about the why, Orshi?
Sure, let's go ahead.
Okay, so this is one of my favorites and it's a little bit unusual, but I think that measuring value and demonstrating value of a legal team, whether it's an in-house legal team or it's a law firm, often is not just about, the time input, which is what we all think about. How many hours are we in the office or how hard are we working? It's actually about the most impactful thing that you're going to do. So it's the riskiest piece of work, or it's the most complex, or the most important of all, the most strategically valuable. And so capturing information around this can be an extremely powerful way of demonstrating value back to your clients, whether they're internal corporate clients or whether they're your law firm clients. And they're really interesting data points. They're very subjective, which makes that whole conversation around the cleanliness and consistency of the data a little more challenging. But even if they are subjective and wrong, they're likely to be more accurate than what you're capturing now, which makes them valuable in themselves. So I am a very big advocate of thinking about the strategic value of the work and what that means for how you allocate your time and your resources, and in particular the prioritization of what it is that you're doing. In Zakia, we capture risk profile, which I'm sure that Adam can talk to, but the complexity and the strategic value of the work we capture on a scale of 0 to 10, which then allows you to plot on a quadrant here the complexity of the work against the strategic value of the work. And you can see the size of the dot berries here. That's based on those t-shirt sizes that we were talking about. And it allows you then to start to think about where you want to focus your energy and what you might want to do less of. But it also allows you to identify where some of those streams of work might be that where you could implement automation, or you might look at managed legal services. Adam, I'm going to hand over to you because I know that you've got stories about how you use this chart with your team.
Yes. First of all, I think it's very interesting to see as our team members categorize their matters in terms of complexity and strategic value. Sometimes you are surprised what is defined as strategically important or very complex by one person compared to the other person within the team. So I think it's not only good to talk about this categorizations because the data will be more clear or more consistent. It's also important to talk about these differences in the categorization, because this means that we see the complexity of something in a different way, and that is not necessarily true. So something is either complex or not, and depending on the experience and background of the given person who made the categorization. It may feel different, but still there must be an objective scale of complexity and the importance within at least the company. So first that, and second, we like this chart. Usually it doesn't look like this. So this is a nice example here, but what you expect on this chart is more or less a 45-degree line in the middle. So you expect that with strategic value, yes, something like that. With strategic value, together grows complexity. Now, obviously, with matters with a high strategic value and high complexity, you need to deal with. You need to work a lot. On the other end of that 45-degree line is the category of less complexity, less strategic value. We should get rid of those. And the most striking are actually but these are logical consequences and ideas. The most striking are in this chart usually the outsiders. So either matters with a very high complexity and a very low strategic value, then you are like, what the hell it is? Or matters which are strategically very important but not complex at all. Okay, then let's do them now. So it's like those outsiders are always very, very interesting to me. We always talk about them.
Do you actually use this chart internally to prioritize your work?
Yes, absolutely. And we compare, so we put the whole team on this. It's going to be very, very crowded. So you basically hardly can distinguish between the bubbles, but you definitely see the outsiders, and we deal with them together.
Yeah, but then it should also be interactive, right? You can click on it, and then it will open up to see all the details of the matter.
Yes.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for all these insights. So now that we've gathered all the data, all the who, what, why, and when, shall we see the output, like what we do with this data? How do we make sense of it in a visual context?
Absolutely, and one of the things that we mentioned earlier is the importance of being able to collect this information very quickly. So even though we've had quite detailed conversations today about the data and why you would capture each of these data points, we've actually only talked about 11 different metrics. And so if you can set your data collection up in a manner which allows you to, say, template different types of work, then you should be able to capture this information very quickly. But 11 metrics will give you 39 million different combinations of data analytics. So combining, say, for example, on the last graph, we looked at strategy and complexity with the size, and you might also color code that to include risk. You've got 4 metrics there on one chart, and there are so many different ways of doing that that it can be quite overwhelming. And of course, this is where lawyers in particular struggle in something like Excel, because it's not your natural place. You all like to work in Microsoft Word rather than Microsoft Excel. And so this is the tricky part about it. So really what you want to be able to do is to set up your, go right back to the very beginning, think about why you were capturing this data, think about what you want to communicate and who you want to communicate it to, and then set up your graphs and your charts in a manner which allows you to achieve those outcomes. So think about which combinations of data points are going to help you to achieve those particular outcomes. And that might be, for example, resourcing and prioritization. And then with that data at hand, it's going to be an informed discussion, informed decision making, and it will allow you to then communicate with your internal clients based on all of those data points like volume and legal spend, strategic importance, matter risk, and of course monetary significance. So those data points are just examples of what you might do, but the really important thing is to go right back to the very beginning and say, why did we want to capture this information? Then have a look at the data and then think about how you want to communicate it. So it's not an easy process to create that visualization. And of course, one of the things that we do, and this speaks very much to my background in the business analytics world, is to start to pull it together into a format that has specific communication goals. So you can see here I've put up two different examples. One is an example that you might use for your CEO, and the other is an example of what you might put together for, say, Adam. And what we do with these 39 million different combinations is pull it into a single page or multi-page report that will communicate to your business about what it is that you want or what it is that you're doing, and most importantly, demonstrate the value of the legal team to the client base. But I am very, very certain that these pictures are going to capture the attention of your audience, that numbers, statistics, charts are very, very powerful ways for you to be able to make decisions and also get the buy-in or the support of your internal stakeholders for in-house legal teams, and also your client base if you're from a law firm, when you've got these sorts of communication tools at your fingertips. Adam, did you want to add anything on? Yeah.
Adam, will you share your experience and how you use these visual charts in your team and with your internal clients?
Yes, as I said, we love the quadrant, which is down there, and the other parts shown here. We use the methods by divisions and the methods by category. This one is in order to understand who the big clients are and whether we allocate sufficient resources to those big clients or not. The trends we don't analyze. We have the feeling that is more or less constant. I mean, the volume of the legal work. What is more interesting to us is it's how it is divided between divisions and different matters. So we focus on those parts.
And would you do different reports if you're having an internal meeting with your legal team, or if you do a report for a business department? Is there a difference?
Only in the scope we cover, because obviously the internal clients is not very interested in the data of the other departments. And when we look at the data as a team, for us this is the most interesting. How the tasks are divided between the different clients and how we should divide ourselves between the different clients.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Shall we see if we have any questions from the audience? I don't know if Julia, can you please help us with this at this point, if there is anything that we should cover before moving on to case study?
No questions yet, but everybody is invited to ask questions.
Exactly. So let's perhaps discuss another case study, Jody, with that your experience with the Coca-Cola team, how they use the Zakia platform, and if we get any questions in the meantime, we can jump back to those.
Absolutely. And so I'm just trying to find my sorry, I'm trying to find my other presentation that we had up just before we jumped on, but I have managed to lose that, and it had some other slides that we had prepared. So apologies for that. I was just going to share with you sorry, I'm just having some technical difficulties, which is always the way with a technical person. Bear with me. Sorry, Orshi, I know we're having some dramas here. There we go. Okay, let's go to this one. Okay. So I've actually just now taken off the Coca-Cola Amateur one by going to this. The Coca-Cola Amateur team have been using Zakia for about 18 months, and so their data set is it has really hit that moment of lovely consistency, and they've worked very hard at achieving that over that period of time. One of the things that they noticed was around the intellectual property. So when I used that as an example earlier, it's right off the back of their case study, which you can see on our website if you want more detail. But what they noticed in particular was a rise in or a greater volume of intellectual property than what they had realised was in their internal legal team. And there was one person who was actually quite interested in that particular space. So they were able to carve off that body of work and get one of their internal team members to focus solely on the intellectual property work, which was really interesting for them. And they were able to reallocate the resources, if you like. So that was quite an interesting and useful way for them to use that data. And they've since done some new projects around automation using a technology here in Australia, automating particular contracts and particular streams of work, which is about being able to, as I said, streamline the work so that they can increase the volume without having to increase their headcount. So they're taking out big bodies of data and trying to find more efficient ways of resourcing it so that they can continue to deal with a very rapidly growing business without having to add more lawyers to the team. And they're a very similar size to you, Adam. So they're about 10 to 12 lawyers across the Asia Pacific region. So it's I think it's a common story for teams of that size.
Do you know if they have anybody allocated to use the platform? Because there was this question from, I think, Marianne earlier in the beginning of the webinar about the role of the paralegal. And perhaps if Marianne, if you would like to step in and comment on what you heard or how you use any similar system, maybe Julia can help unmute you and you can step in if you're still online.
I'm happy to answer the question while we're waiting, Orshi. So certainly the Coca-Cola Amatil team, so Richard Conway is the Deputy General Counsel there and he is the champion of Zakia. But actually their whole team is very disciplined about the way that they use the platform, and it's been that they don't have a person who is dedicated to entering this information, but we do certainly see that model in other organisations. So I can see that there's a whole lot of questions coming in on the chat here. And so yes, I can comment if I can be unmuted. Julia has that under control, I think.
Hello? Yeah,
Hi, Marianne. Welcome to the discussion.
Hello. Thank you very much for giving me the word. There's a very interesting discussion going on everywhere. If you read it on LinkedIn, the internet, you will find these topics coming up all the time. And I'm lately involved in reflecting within my company on the role of the paralegal in all this, because we have discovered that most lawyers are not so familiar nor with legal operations, nor with data and technology and all these related subjects. And we think that it's really necessary to have someone in the team, that was what you confirmed during this lecture, someone that manages the data, someone that manages the output of the data, someone that knows how to manipulate this, someone that knows which tools and which technologies are best suited to be used in the specific teams, because it can be different from one team to another. We think there is a real development going on in that field, and we think that paralegals are naturally well placed to pick up this role. But there is also the movement of legal operations coming up, especially in Europe now. So we also see that it's not so clear for legal departments. Do I hire a legal operations officer, yes or no? And yes, what will this person be doing? Is it a lawyer? Is it someone that has maybe some legal background but is not necessarily practicing law anymore? And these are all questions that I think a lot of legal departments and law firms are still struggling with.
Exactly. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your input. Indeed, it's very important to have someone dedicated to champion a certain tool, to champion a certain new tech-assisted work stream, whether that's legal data analytics or some sort of an automation project.
Orshi, do you mind if I respond to that? And also I notice Marisa has also asked a question about smaller law firms. One of the things that I think we are blessed with at the moment is software. And Zakia was built for teams, originally built for teams of 2 to 10 lawyers for in-house teams. And I come from a small-ish law firm, so we had about 30 in our team at my law firm. So I certainly understand the challenges of very small teams that have very few resources, but actually these tools now exist to make the adoption as easy as possible and to automate this process. And so the Coca-Cola Amatil team, Adam's team at Aegis are but two of the examples of teams that are not using dedicated paralegal resources, are embedding these softwares in their everyday workflow, and then it automates the process of the data analytics for you. It generates the reports, it generates the dashboards, so that whole body of work has been taken out of the equation. So it's not to say that everything is just coming straight out of your head and into a beautifully crafted report. Of course, there is some data entry that has to get in there in some way. But these pieces of software, Zakia being one example, have been built precisely because these small teams don't have the resources available. So I'm very, very passionate about what I think has been a neglected part of the market for many, many years. We've got lots of very big, heavy technology tools, but what we have now is cloud software that makes it possible for small teams to access these things.
Thank you so much, Jody, and also Adam, for all your input and valuable insights. I guess we're running out of time, so I'll quickly wrap this up. So we hope that everybody found this ELTA webinar helpful and got inspired to demonstrate the value of legal work with data and analytics. And I would mention 3 takeaways from this session. Number 1, make sure that you start capturing data for your legal work. Number 2, start making sense of your data that you've collected by using some sort of analytics platform. And number 3, put it all together in a nice visual reporting format so that you can better communicate the value of your legal expertise to your clients, internal or external. So thank you all for your attention, and see you at the next ELTA Live webinar, and have a great day. Bye-bye.
Excellent. Thanks, Orshi. And for anybody who's interested, there is also these resources which you can access from our website. Feel free, of course, to contact any of us if you've got any other questions. Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Bye-bye.